How to Make a Baguette with Pouliche by Lexi Massarelli. First, we're going to start with our ingredients. For this basic lean dough, we only need 4 ingredients. They are flour, salt, water, and yeast. Flour is the first ingredient, and it's the food for the yeast. It also holds the structure of the bread. Salt is next, and it controls the fermentation of the bread. It slows down the fermentation so that it doesn't start developing very quickly, and it also adds flavor to the bread. Water is the next ingredient. It activates the yeast, and it also gives the product hydration, which results in all of the ingredients forming together. The yeast generates the fermentation, which results in the bread rising. Another ingredient that we need to add is the peppermint. The peppermint that we use for baguettes is Pouliche. Pouliche was the first peppermint invented. It has 100% hydration. It can take anywhere from 6 to 16 hours for fermentation. It gives the bread a nutty flavor due to the lactic culture, and it's the most popular peppermint used for baguettes. Because this takes several hours, it needs to be prepared the day before. When we have all of our ingredients scaled, it's time to mix. There are 3 mixing methods. There's short, improved, and intensive. The short mixing method is the best method. It takes the longest because the mixing is done by hand or done by a mixer at first speed. So the gluten develops during the fermentation, not during the mixing. This results in the best crumb and the best flavor. The next mixing method is the improved. We mix the improved on first speed to incorporate the ingredients, and then second speed to start the gluten development. Medium fermentation time because the gluten starts to develop when we're mixing the dough. This is most commonly used because it results in a good end product like the short, but it doesn't take as long, and it's not as bad as the intensive mixing method. The intensive method is basically just to fully develop the gluten to save time, which results in a fast fermentation, but it gives your bread a very bland flavor. Once we've mixed the bread, we move on to the bulk fermentation. We place the dough into a watered container so that it doesn't stick to the sides. So when we first start the fermentation process, the dough will look something like this because it has not risen yet, and then when time starts to come by, it will start looking like this because it starts to rise. During fermentation, the water and the sugar in the bread creates CO2 and alcohol. To get rid of these CO2, we need to fold the dough. By folding the dough, we're getting rid of the CO2 and also strengthening the gluten and creating an even temperature throughout the product. To fold the dough, you take the end of the dough from north to the south end and fold it in twice. And then you pick it up and realign it so that the dough is going straight down the middle of the container. Once our fermentation is done, it is time to start dividing the dough. When we start to divide the dough, we will take the dough out of the container and place it onto a floured bench. On the bench, we will take our bench scraper and slowly cut across the dough. We want to create 400-gram pieces. This is the desired amount of dough you want in order to shape a baguette. It's best to cut the pieces in as few pieces as possible because it will be easier to shape if it's all one piece. Once we have all of the dough divided, it's time to shape. So we will take a piece of dough that is 400 grams, and from the north end to the south end, we will fold it in. You want to place your thumb on one end of the dough and take your other hand and use this bone to press the dough down to create a seam. So we'll hold our thumb here, push the dough over, and press down to create a seam. Now we'll pick up the dough, shake off excess flour, and kind of stretch it out and flip it over. So now this is the north end. We'll repeat this step again, taking it over and creating a seam with our hand. Once we have this shape, we will do a bench rest. The dough will be flipped over and put onto a floured work surface for 20 minutes. This allows the gluten to rest so that when we do the final shape, we're able to stretch the dough. Now that it's time for the final shape, we will take our dough off of the floured surface and shake it off to get rid of the excess flour. The seam is still on the bottom of the dough. We will degas the dough again to get rid of excess CO2 and then pick it up and stretch it out. To get the final shape of the baguette, we will do a process similar to the pre-shape. So what we do is we start from one end of our dough and keep our thumb here and begin to slowly fold it over. We'll press down again with our hand to degas the dough even more. We'll flip the dough over again and repeat the process. Degassing again. Now that we have our desired dough, we will take it and flip it with the seam down and begin to shape the baguette. To shape the baguette, you want to start with your fingers in the middle of the dough and you roll the dough out until it gets the desired length. When you get to the ends, you should apply more pressure so that the ends are pointed. The dough should look something like this when you're done shaping it. Now that we have our dough shape how we want it, we need to begin the final proofing. So for final proof, we will place our baguettes into a bread bag and it will be covered. We want high humidity, so we spray the bag with water. Our dough should be about 75 to 78 degrees at this point. We spray the water in order for the dough not to get a skin over it, so that when we go on to scoring, it will be very easy to cut. The dough proofs for an hour. Now it is time to score our bread. Scoring is very important because when we bake it, that is where the excess gas will escape from the bread in the oven. To score a baguette, you want to look at it from point A to point B. So the north end is point A and the south end is point B. You need to score at a 45-degree angle. There should be 5 cuts down the center. They should be 3 inches long and they should not be overlapping any more than 1 inch. When you take the razor blade and score, you need to go as quickly as possible in order to create a very even incision. So you start from point A and begin your first cut. You go directly down the center with your 5 cuts, making them as straight and as even as possible. Now it is time to bake the bread. We place the bread into the oven using the loading docks. We bake the bread with steam so that the crust does not start to develop right away, so the inside of the bread can bake first. Once the bread has a dark, even golden brown color, it is done. Your final product should look like this. The cuts are even down the center of the bread. and all of the gas has escaped, resulting in a beautiful loaf. For the cooling and the storing of the bread, you should not cut open the bread until it's completely cool. It is still cooking on the inside, and the crust crumb is still developing. The flavors are still enhancing, so you should wait until it's cool. To store it, you should keep it in a brown paper bag. This keeps it fresh versus plastic, which will make the bread soggy. And that is everything you need to know to make a baguette. Thanks for watching.